You're listening to This Week in Cardiology from theheart.org on Medscape.
Hi everyone, this is John Mandrola from theheart.org Medscape Cardiology, and this is This Week in Cardiology for May 11th, 2018. And this is a special week because I'm here at the Heart Rhythm Society meeting in Boston. The most significant trials of my career as an electrophysiologist has just been released yesterday. Dr. Douglas Packer presented the results of the CABANA trial. And normally on This Week in Cardiology, I review 4 or 5 studies, but this week I'll spend time only on CABANA and return to the normal format next week. So I cannot remember a more consequential heart rhythm meeting than this one in 2018. Seriously, all that has been talked about is CABANA. Dr. Doug Packer presented the trial as a late-breaking clinical trial Thursday. CABANA was a superiority trial testing outcomes with either AF ablation or best drug therapy for AF. Now we should stop and consider the significance of this trial. In a Wall Street Journal report yesterday by Peter Loftus, he cited analysts who estimated that the AF ablation market is over $4 billion. And in meetings and in journals, key opinion leaders increasingly advocate for an earlier role for AF ablation. And my observations from the real world is that this sort of advocacy has had a positive effect. I see patients referred way too early, even before, say, a sleep apnea test or a discussion about risk factors. Another important point is historical. Well, now, in 2018, many people say it was Pollyanna-ish to think that AF ablation will make people live longer. But not long ago, very smart people involved with CABANA felt it was critical to show whether attainment of sinus rhythm provided a mortality benefit. Right? AFib is supposed to be dangerous. Get rid of AFib and you'll make people have fewer strokes and live longer. The idea was that in AFFIRM, for instance, drugs did not provide mortality benefit, but ablation is much more reliable at restoring sinus rhythm. And so if AFib is indeed dangerous, causing stroke and heart failure, getting rid of AFib would reduce outcomes. The NIH and major device companies funded CABANA, and CABANA randomized about 2,200 patients, about 1,100 in each arm, to ablation or antiarrhythmic drugs. And this was done in more than 100 centers across the world. And to be a CABANA center, you had to be an experienced AF ablation center and you had to be an experienced AF operator. The primary endpoint used to be total mortality, but it was changed in a blinded fashion to a composite endpoint of mortality disabling stroke, major bleeds, and cardiac arrest. Now, there was crossover between both arms. It's important to note that 100 patients, or 9% in the ablation arm, did not receive an ablation. Mostly, Dr. Packer said, because they changed their mind. 301 patients, or 27% of the patients in the drug arm, crossed over to the ablation arm. And so remember this fact. This is actually quite important. The baseline characteristics of the groups were similar. The mean age was about 67. About 40% had PAF and 47% persistent AF, and the rest were long-standing persistent AF. So a pretty typical patient population. And the original results of the results were analyzed according to an intention to treat principle. That means that patients who crossed over were analyzed in the group that they were randomized to. A patient in the drug arm who had an ablation was analyzed in the drug arm. Now, trialists analyze data this way because it preserves the effect of randomization, and this was also specified in the CABANA trial protocol. In the intention to treat analysis, it showed absolutely no difference in outcomes. The Kaplan-Meier curves were identical. They're essentially the same number of events in either group. And importantly, the event rates were very low despite the high-risk cohort. There were very few strokes, there were very few deaths, and very few bleeding events. In a sense, the top-line result, the real results, the pure results, were that the CABANA trial was negative. The tricky part and the main area of controversy comes in the on-treatment analysis, which the paper's protocol says, quote, will be performed as a sensitivity analysis on the primary results. But the talk at HRS, and it's led by many key opinion leaders on stage and also online and on Twitter, is that it makes more sense to look at an on-treatment analysis because ablation cannot work if you don't get ablation. So this analysis showed a 7% rate of the primary endpoint in the 1,300 patients who had ablation and a 10.9% rate of the primary endpoint in the drug arm, and that was significant to a p-value of 0.006. And this as-treated analysis also showed a mortality benefit 4.4% versus 7.5%, and again, that was statistically significant. An analysis that was by per protocol, which means when a crossover occurred there was censoring, the hazard ratio of the primary endpoint was 0.73, and it reached statistical significance at a p-value of 0.046. There were also some trends in subgroups. One was that younger patients seemed to do better with ablation and older patients did worse. And another subgroup was that patients with CHF seemed to be better with ablation, which is important because it goes along with Castle AF. A note on safety. CABANA reported a very low complication rate with no atrial esophageal fistulas, small numbers of vascular complications, and tamponade. There were only 3 TIAs and no strokes. So I think a false headline here was to say that ablation is safe. I think that would be dangerous as there were experienced centers who knew they were working on patients in the most important trial of their careers. I don't think that we can generalize safety in these experienced centers to safety in the real world. And so the conclusions thus far are that ablation did not produce significant reductions in the primary endpoint and all-cause mortality. But high numbers of crossovers affect the results. And if ablation has a positive effect, and a quarter of the patients in the drug arm got ablation but are counted in a drug arm, then that will bias the results towards the null. The problem, of course, is that using on-treatment analysis takes away the effect of randomization. It makes results more like an observational study. In other words, did the patients who cross over do better because of the ablation, or did they do better because of other issues? If that is the case, we can't say that ablation caused the improvement in the primary endpoint because there could have been other factors, confounders. In the end, Dr. Packer and Dr. Prostowski told a rapturous audience of AFib ablationists that AFib ablation is an acceptable treatment. And I'm struggling with this. I think we need to see the paper, which is not yet published. AF ablation, my friends, is expensive. It's invasive. It has risks. And if it doesn't improve outcomes, then all we're left with is quality of life benefits because patients feel better or have less AFib, then if we're going to accept subjective outcomes only, then we have to have a placebo-controlled trial. Now, I'm going to write a column on CABANA this weekend. I've talked to so many colleagues about this. It's going to be hard to toggle between the purest scientific view and the practical view, and of course my bias as an ablation doctor that it works, because the people who got ablation seem to do better. Now, one thing, I'll close with this, one thing that bothers me is how emotional science seems to be. Now, why does a trial have to be positive to be celebrated? I mean, CABANA is beautiful work, it's hard work. Ablation did not meet its primary endpoint. But so what? Are we doctors or are we ablationists? I mean, to be disappointed that ablation came out less spectacular than we thought, why can't that be celebrated as new knowledge to help our patients? So that's it for this week in cardiology. I'm grateful that you listened. Please feel free to leave some comments. I'm interested in hearing what you think. Until next week, this is John Mandrola from the Heart.org Medscape Cardiology.
You're listening to This Week in Cardiology from the Heart.org on Medscape.